I would love to say it was immaculate taste and fabulous timing, but it was pure chance.
Hello, Simon.
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Amazing to see you again. Right, well, we're going to talk about. We did an XTC one a little while ago. We're just going to talk through Cardiac's catalogue. So there's not going to be any hard criticism here. There's a slight spoiler warning because obviously it's a band we hugely respect, and my friend Carvis was in the band, so. You know, there's not going to be, no one's going to be, and it's more of a case that I think I can only give my personal view on Cardiacs. I wasn't there. This is a band I discovered in 2010 when I met Carvis, and I was looked up some of his stuff on YouTube, and I thought, oh my God, this is an incredible band. It's just like, you know, and you know, we watched all the Gibber and Twitch and all those, you know, the Shed videos and that, and it's just like unbelievable. And we couldn't believe we'd never heard of them.
They're one of the. I know this sounds like a cliche, but they, you know, these kind of things are cliches for a reason. They were one of the best kept secrets on the rock scene, and I think they were kept that way by a unique set of circumstances that I don't think many bands have what you call have encountered in their life. But I'm sure we will get to that as we talk about the band. Are we going to talk about the discography, or are we just in general just going to chat about them?
If we use the discography as a way of sort of telling the story, perhaps. But all right. How did you discover Cardiacs, Simon?
Well, I would love to say it was immaculate taste and fabulous timing, but it was pure chance, absolute pure chance that I encountered them. They very famously or infamously supported Marillion on their, I think it was their Fugazi tour, and it was near the end of 1984, I think it was, and Marillion were playing at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I went along to see them, and Cardiacs were the support band. And I always remember it because they had this interminable long intro, which is very, now I know the Cardiacs. It's very, very sort of like part of their identity, the way that they draw things out to beyond it being uncomfortable. And they had this thing where the whole stage set was dressed in sort of drapes, and it was a little bit like that Genesis thing where they used black light on white surfaces kind of thing, and day glow type things. And I remember sort of like what they did is they had this long sequence where these guys came on in almost like hazmat costumes, and they just gradually took all of the drapes off the musical equipment. It was a little bit like theatre, and I was like going, "What the hell's going on here?" And then the Cardiacs themselves wandered on, and then they played this this instrumental. And it was literally, and this is something which again is very like the Cardiacs. They played the same three chords for like 9 minutes, and it was like, and they did this guitar thing over the top of it, but were gradually building it, and it became this sort of like almost like a what would you call it? Sort of a noise, I suppose, the best way to describe it. And the Marillion fans were not enjoying it at all, and they started booing. And they were, I think, they were only on stage for a little while. And I saw this band, and I know a lot of my friends at the time had this exact same reaction, which is that smattered amongst the boos and the jeers were people staring with their mouths open going, "This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen," or "I have no idea what this is, but it's fabulous." And they actually couldn't finish the tour. They were getting so much hate and dislike from the Marillion fans. But I went, I have to see more of this band. And it, again, dumb bloody luck, it turns out that they were based just down the road from me in Kingston. I lived in sort of like Mortlake, and I could get a train to Kingston. So I went along and I went to a venue in Teddington, which is halfway between sort of like, Mortlake and Kingston in sort of southwest London. And it was a church hall. And I think this was in 85. This was like a little while later. And the whole evening was like theatre. It was unbelievable theatre. You wandered in and the whole place they dressed the entire room in this sort of like day glowy kind of odd lighting. And the PA was doing this sort of like, I don't know if you've ever heard an opening to a Cardiacs gig, but there's this sort of like machinery noise that you get in the background. And it was like emanating everywhere. And they had TVs in shopping trolleys, and it was like almost like an installation art, and you could wander around, and the TVs were like playing static, and every now and again it would say 25 minutes for before an announcement from the Alphabet Business Concern, and then it would go back to static, and it would count down and count down and count down until eventually all of the TVs came on, and then there was this like 10 minutes of just talking by the Alphabet Business Concern, and it was like, I think you can get it on YouTube now, and it was like the Garden of Fadeless Splendor or something like this, and it was surreal and absolutely hypnotic and incredibly funny as well, and then that turned off, and people came out and they wheeled the shopping trolleys away, and then the support band. I've never forgotten this. The support band was this very, very old magician who did paper tearing. And he did sort of like, he'd tell a story and then he'd show everybody this sort of paper tearing thing. And then and he was like pulling like flowers from his pocket, and the whole pulling endless scarves out of his pocket and all this kind of. And I was going, this is like no gig I've ever been to in my entire life. And then, as he's walking off the stage, the PA just leaps into life with this enormous sort of. And I remember, yeah, exactly. And I remember the old guy visibly jumping up into the air. He was like, oh, like this, as he wandered off the stage. And then the curtains came back. And it was completely black. You couldn't see anything because the stage was like a big dark hole. And then all of a sudden, I think they go into. I can tell you exactly which track it was that they opened up with. It was Gibber and Twitch, and they opened up with Gibber and Twitch, and it was just astonishing. It was like I can't begin to sort of like tell you the energy that came off of this band. And for an hour, it was like watching what was that film called? The Midwich Cuckoos, like like those possessed children, sort of like doing this song. And at the very end of the gig, Tim Smith, who had this really beaten up old Ibanez guitar was painted green. He threw the guitar on the ground and the entire band just jumped on it, jumped on the guitar. And then they left the stage. And that was my first Cardiacs gig. And I went, I'm hooked. This is everything I want out of a band. This is like a complete performance.
I think they had that thing where they were... they had their own world, like a bit like Voivod or something like that, where they've got their own. They spoke with their own vocabulary. They had their own visual identity, and that's a lot of bands don't have. But they had their own. You went into Cardiac's world, which I think But I just can't believe I didn't pick up on them because until I met Carvus, I didn't know anything about them. I was into Dark Star with Bick. And I love Dark Star. And I was into Mr. Bungle, who virtually a Cardiac tribute act, and I
an American Cardiacs,
American branch of Cardiacs land, and I would have loved Cardiacs when I was a kid. They were my sort of band because I was into that sort of weird was into like the Dead Kennedys and American punk and stuff, and I was also into prog. And there's, if you mix the two up and add XTC, you sort of get you get Cardiacs, don't you? And there was so much in Zappa, obviously, as well. And there's so much. But Tim Smith wasn't a juxtaposition of his influences. He had his own singular voice. And I like what I was talking to Carl about the other day, and we did a chat thing on here, and we were he had a through compositional style that you could hear. We were saying about bands that sound like Cardiacs. You can see they sort of sound like Cardiacs, but you can see the scaffolding. You can see how it all works. Whereas with Tim Smith's songs, it was all about there was a melodic flow through the tune that's very similar to, once again, Andy Partridge or something like that, where the song there's a line that goes through the song it was through composed and really brilliant compositions. And a lot of the bands that rip them off, what they do is they take the stop-start arrangements and those things, but they miss out the melodic heart and the in really good lyrics and really the smart pop composition. You can hear that he was. There's the Kinks and the Who and stuff like that in there, and XTC, and they miss out the pop part of it. They miss that, the pop song element, the psychedelic pop song element, and they just go to it's Cardiac, stoppy start, got it, right, off we go, stoppy start with horns, and it's like, I think Cardiac's on to something a bit bigger than that, and we'll talk about the albums, but I really am. I feel very sad that I missed them, and I think it was one of those things. The press hated them, didn't they?
Yeah, they were vilified in the press. It was
didn't get it, did they?
Kind of double-edged sword, because I think in the long term it helped them in a little bit, in the same way that Rolling Stone hated Rush, and as a result, basically what happened is that at the end of the day, Rush just got on with it and said, well, that's the way it is. And at the end of the day, they've been borne out by the quality of their material. And I think the same applies to Cardiacs. They plied a path which just did not fit with the ideology of the British press at the time.
I think anything that I suppose it's that a lot of the press was three chords in the truth and keep everything simple. And obviously they weren't about that, but they had these songs. They had, just amazing pop songs, and it's bizarre that people missed that. This band had these incredible songs. So, if we go through the catalogue, going from the first album I've heard, I know they did there's like EPs and singles and stuff, wasn't there?
Yeah. That's right.
I don't know that material at all. I know they re-recorded it with Carvis with the garage concerts thing, but I don't know that stuff. So I'm coming.
For me, I was going to say, for me, the very first album that I owned was the Seaside, which is on cassette, and I think they've re-released it. It had a different version of "Is This the Life" on it, and the interesting thing is that version has Tim Smith shredding on it, like he shreds.
Guitar player, really good.
Yeah, and it's one of those moments where you can see that if you listen to that version, you listen to the later version, there was certainly some honing of the sound still to be done. And I think that was not their first tape release, but it was their first album. I think they've now re-released it. You can hear it all on Spotify now, but that's the first album. I don't have the cassette any longer. I lent it, and I think I know who I lent it to. It was my brother, and the bastard never gave it back. But yeah, I lent my cassette copy, and I never got it back. But the bottom line here is that it's a thing, and who really cares about things nowadays?
The most important thing is the music, and
yeah, exactly.
But the audacity to release Gibber and Twitch as the first song on the album in 1984, where nothing else like it at all. And it's just weird because that sounds modern now. That sounds because it's timeless songwriting. One of the problems with a lot of bands is they don't have enough ideas, whereas Cardiacs have an abundance of ideas. They've got more ideas than they know. Anyone would know what to do with. So everything, and it's been remarkable that since obviously Tim sadly passed, and I really feel for the family and the fans, because the Pond guys, I mean, I don't, I've done a lot of gigs, sort of Cardiac's family gigs, and the Pond guys are lovely. They're just the most lovely fan base, and they're just so into it. And it's, I mean, I was lucky enough to play with Knifewell quite a few times and meet a lot of those guys, and they're lovely. And but the to have that ability to write songs like that is just, jeez. I mean,
it's a singular. I mean, I know that from what I remember, I heard an interview with Carvis a little while ago that Tim was very influenced by Quadrophenia, the album by The Who, and the fact that Tim taught himself to write music, to score music by listening, reading along the score that came with Quadrophenia, which the version he had, and that's how he wrote all of his early material. He didn't record it; he scored it.
On score, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't really. I don't know. It's just unbelievable. That what vision that man had. Incredible. I mean,
it is astonishing. I mean, what are your feelings about those early sort of recordings? Is it something which you find a little embryonic, or is it something you can fully embrace?
I like. I mean, my favourite sound is the Sing to God era, and I like the stuff that Carvis did with them when they went full metal.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really, really properly, the thrash bits and the little thrashy, the chuggy thrash bits and the pinched harmonics Carvis has brought into it. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Carvis's playing anyway, but I think the energy they had, those last few shows, and which, I mean, I'd love to have seen them. And I remember Carvis saying to me that they were doing well. They were doing really well, and the gigs were getting busier and busier, and finally, my pattern and people are talking about the band, and did you see that Elton John is a Cardiac fan?
Yeah,
Elton John and Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters and stuff. It's like, this is really weird, because it was 11 years ago when I met Carvis, barely anyone knew Cardiacs really, apart from people who were smart and in the know who loved them, and idiots from Roaston, like I was, just missed out on this whole incredible journey that you guys all got to be part of, and I just missed out on it. But as soon as I heard the tracks, I was like, this is remarkable stuff.
It is astonishing. I mean, for me personally, I mean, every fan has their own personal sort of like contact with the band, and for me, my sort of like favorite period of the band was sort of this kind of sort of what would you call it? Almost like frantic orchestration period. The sort of like with the classic lineup of William Drake, Dominic Luckman, Jim on bass, Sarah on saxophone, Tim on Tim Quiet. Is it Tim Key or Tim Quiet? I can never remember. I can never remember how to pronounce his name. And I'm sorry, Tim, if you're watching
the percussionist, dude.
Yeah, the percussionist, and sort of like that five piece with the guys sort of like at the Alphabet Business Concern. That was my era, I suppose you could call it, of the Cardiacs. I love that, the sort of like this era, and the Seaside, and I think the very first like official album of theirs, which was the Whole World Window, a Little Man in a House, I think it's called, and the Whole World Window, which I think,
because they had various, they weren't the records weren't distributed through the normal channels normally, were they? And then there was I think they got a deal with Rough Trade, and that went, the Rough Trade went bust. They continually had bad luck, didn't they?
Yes, I mean, and astonishingly bad luck, and also some kind of quasi incest scandal where they thought that Tim and Sarah were brother and sister as well.
But I suppose all publicity, etc., is supposed to be good publicity. But I mean, it's a very weird thing that this band could be, this good and still be, I mean, I was primed for this sort of stuff. You know what I mean? this would have been just the sort of thing I was into when I was a kid. And I'm just really glad I found it eventually. But also, people are still discovering it. And like I say, Dave Grohl discovered them over lockdown. Dave Grohl raving about cardiacs. And it's like, wow.
I remember, this is one of the beautiful things about music, is that it's not time sensitive. You can find it in your own time. There could be people in 60 to 100 years that are going to discover this band, and it will blow their minds, really.
But you listen to something like Is This the Life? I mean, that is the sort of thing that would have been it did well in the indie charts at the time, but it could have been a huge record at the time. It could have been that's got a hit single written all over, hasn't it?
It did grace the sort of like the outside of the charts, because I know that there was one, and I can't remember who it was, but there was one DJ on Radio 1 that championed them. Right. And he played the song constantly, that song. And I think because of that, they started to get a little bit of national coverage out of it.
I mean, it just, what a catalogue of material. It must have been so weird, to be putting this stuff out, and then no one really, a lot of people didn't hear it. And like Big Ship, Tarred and Feathered, that's Songs for Ships and Irons. I don't see an EP, or it's like an album, isn't it? It's like a compilation thing.
There's a lot of they also released a lot of EPs, which I think then got coalesced into sort of anthology things later on in their career.
And then there's a lot of live stuff as well. So that early stuff, the arrangements on that and the composition is truly world class, and it's just there's so many ideas going on. It's hard for me.
There was no other band out there that was doing it, really. That density of arrangement.
Band doing it. There's still no one else doing that. I mean, like I say, it's just. I think, like I say, XTC is a good comparison, possibly, in terms of the band that continually took things forward and was really brave and doing interesting stuff. But blimey, just how could you got to be?
The thing that always blows my mind, you and I are musicians, Matt, and this is something which I think both you and I can really appreciate, which is, imagine turning up to a Cardiacs rehearsal and you're sitting around with all your gear. You go, well, how was your weekend? Yeah, it was all right. Yeah, sort of like, I had to sort of like do a little bit of, I had to fix the fence at the back of the house. And like, unfortunately, we were out of milk, so I had to go get it. Okay, yeah, right. So we ready for this song? 1, 2, 3. And then all of a sudden, that music coming out of it,
I mean, it's just... But like I say, it's one of those things I think will continue to grow. After, obviously what happened is this. I think people will continue to discover them. So we've talked about the early stuff. On Landing in the Sea, which has got the Duck and Roger the Horse, which is my favourite song on there.
It is astonishingly that I think you could probably say.
What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say you could probably say that that's the first sort of like new material, because a lot of the stuff was legacy material that was written and re-recorded back from sort of like the cardiac arrest days before they became Cardiacs. But yeah, this was the first one that I think was like you recognisably the modern sound of the band. And it's got one of my favourite tracks. I mean, Duck and Roger the Horse is just
it's really like thrashy, sort of fast, punky one. I mean,
but it's also got things like the Ever So Closely Guarded Line on it as well, which is like the best way to describe it is like it's like if you could do gothic horror during a brain mauled seizure, that's basically what it is. Sort of like a grand mauled seizure. It's like it's some of the strangest music, and then it has some of the most beautiful, incredible chord work, harmonic structure I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel qualified to speak about it because I'm not an expert. But from my, if I can shine any light towards people discovering Cardiacs, that's great. But this it's remarkable stuff. So, Heaven Born and Ever Bright.
Now, Heaven Born and Ever Bright was an interesting one, certainly for me, because I know that this was the album which saw the sort of splintering of what they call the classic lineup, and Tim left the band. Tim Key Kwai. I apologise, Tim. I'm sorry, I'm butchering your second name. I know that William Drake had left the band at this point as well, and I think it was down to a tight 4-piece.
Was John Paul on this one? Then? Was this
No, I think this was still Christian Bick, who was playing guitar on this album. Although I think John Paul features on the cover. I don't know how much of this was.
I'm not. I haven't got deep cardiac knowledge, so
yeah, and I know that this was, this was the period I actually remember. I think I actually, and again, this is pure accident. I actually saw the last gig that William Drake did with the Cardiacs at I think it was called, was it the Venue in New Cross? And it was like that was an incredible gig for me, because it was the hottest gig I've ever been to in my entire life. It was like sitting inside an oven. There were, sort of sweat dripping off the walls and stuff, but it was great. But that was his last show, and from that moment on, I think Cardiacs had this kind of using sort of sequences and backing tracks along with a sort of nucleus of a 4-piece, if you will.
Those how they got that tight with those backing tracks, just unbelievable. I mean, it's so it doesn't sound like a backing track.
No, and I think again this comes back down to sort of Tim's writing ability. He was able to sort of score it out in a way which didn't make it the central piece. The backing track was not what the song hung upon. It was the performance of the musicians, but they used it as a sort of like a core from which to sort of like perform from.
I mean, there's definitely got more the guitars. It's a lot heavier guitars as they move forward, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then we're getting into sort of like into the John Paul era of guitars, because John Paul came up with. I know John a little bit, and I hung out with him. I was doing a final acoustic tour before I left the UK, and he was. I met up with him for a long chat with him at a place called Riffs.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and we just chatting away, and it was my opportunity to talk to him because I'd heard of his stuff. He had a band called Ad Nauseum, which were definitely in the same kind of sonic area as Cardiacs, and it made a lot of sense that sort of like John Paul would come together. And I'm not kidding you, John Paul is an immense talent. That man is an astonishing songwriter.
There's a load of stuff on Bandcamp and of his that's really, really good. He's quite zappery, quite a zapper sort of stuff.
Yeah. He has a very different kind of feeling, but I think you'll find with all of the musicians that have played with Tim, they're all incredibly gifted, and I think they all understood the vision. And this is where I think the Zappa comparison comes, whereas Zappa was like all controlling. I think Tim Smith as a writer was a lot more generous. He was a lot more, there could be input into his material to sort of like enhance it, if you know what I mean. And I think you can definitely hear the moment when John started being in the band and how that it became a different kind of Cardiac. Still good, but you could hear the collaborations now.
Because he wrote quite a few songs on Sing to God, didn't he?
He did, and if I'm being really honest with you, while it's not my favorite album, I genuinely think that I think pound for pound, it's probably their best album.
Yeah, I really like Sing to God. I mean, Fiery Gunhand, the lead break on that is one of the best solos I've ever heard. Just the way it moves around
and Man Who, that's on there as well. That's another one, and they redid a version of Nurses Whispering Verses as well, which was from the Seaside era of Cardiacs, maybe even a little bit before.
The one is Dirty Boy, isn't it? On that one there.
Oh God, that's the album. Yeah, that's also, Matt, the album that if anybody was getting into Cardiacs wants, yes. Yeah.
So you got minor chord, then a major chord. And it's just like, oh, there's my arm. Just thinking of that. But there's a bit at the end of that where it's just this, the chords, there's that massive chord progression just goes round and round. It's just like, whew, bloody hell. That's one of the,
What can you say? Yeah, exactly.
When I was ill a couple of years ago, they did it with Carvis, and that did it with Mike Venart, and that they did a live version. I wish I'd seen it. Wish I'd been there for it. And Tim was there. That was when Tim was not very well, bless him. And that must have been quite heavy. I mean, I wasn't very well myself at the time, so I couldn't go. But I'd love to have seen that. But that song's particularly bloody hell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is astonishing, and I think that Sing to God if you're a new fan, that should be your entry point, as far as I'm concerned. Sort of like you can branch out forward and back from there, but that's probably the best example of Cardiacs, in my opinion, at their best.
It's remarkable, yeah. I mean, it's just. I wish I'd seen that lineup. I mean, I'd love to have seen them. I'd like to have seen them when Carvis was in them as well, because I think he's a remarkable guitarist as well. So I'd like to have seen that. So we got Guns next.
Yeah, now Guns is the one that I know the least because at the time I had moved away from the world of Cardiacs. I think I only ever saw them once in the later years. I think I caught up with them at the Astoria sometime in the mid-2000s to see them play, and I never got to see them playing any of the Guns material. But it's you can hear that there's a slightly more commercial edge, if you can call it. Accessible is probably better way of saying it.
But there's still some great tunes on there, and
and astonishing, both virtuosity and again that whole level of songwriting. The way that they were, the way that both Tim and the band were still exploring new territory.
Is it Signs on that one? Signs, that's a really good track.
Yeah, was that the single, or at least the sort of lead track? I won't say a single. I think was it Signs was the single.
Spell with a Shell, that's really good as well. I mean, there's nothing they did that was in any way, they continually made great records, didn't they? Just wow. So finally we got Special Garage Concerts, which is Carvis on guitar, replacing John Paul. And the version of Gibber and Twitch on that is remarkable, isn't it? And the other one I really like is As Cold as It Can Be in English Sea with I remember that was one of the first things I heard them do. I heard the Shed version of. I've got the Shed DVD over there.
Yeah.
I'll have to rig up my PS2 so I can watch it one day.
The whole. I mean, one of the things which I personally think is that the band never sounded and looked better than they did with the Carvis lineup.
Oh, really?
It just looked and sounded astonishing. I mean, I remember sort of like seeing them dressed with sort of like that in all of the black stuff with the red sashes across one side, and it was like the girls who was sort of like doing backing vocals and doing percussion as well, and they just looked astonishing, and they were really starting to, in my opinion, break through.
Yeah, because the Astoria show. I mean, like Travis said to me, that the last tour they did was really, really good and really busy, and he felt they were, people were starting to actually know about them now. And I think it was when like Mike Patton and that and Napalm Death were really sort of starting to talk about it in the press, and they were a band that was sort of built to do well on the internet because they're a good word of mouth band, because they're the sort of thing you won't believe what I've seen. and share those.
That's a great way of describing it. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Because that's probably most people's initial reaction is with them. I remember the first time I heard them, it's like you hear all the bits and then you go, "Oh, this is amazing virtuosity and stuff." But then you go, "These are actually really clever pop songs. This is like the Kinks or the XTC stuff or the Madness." There's a pop line here, and there's also this sort of through composition thing where they use these sort of modulations of key and timbre and juxtapositions of different sections and sort of moving around harmonically. But there's a thing where there's a vision for it. It's not just a lot of people get to the middle eight and go, "Oh, let's do something wacky here," whereas it sounds like, I hate wacky composition. This doesn't sound like that. It sounds like this. Can't stand it. But the cardiac stuff, it sounds like there's a vision for the whole song, and you're on this journey, and then it moves through each section, and it often ends up in these weird choral sections, and it's just clever. And it's really hard to do that. I think you know it's really hard to write, and like I think Andy Partridge or like a Beatles thing, it's that kind of level of songwriting where people can see the whole arrangement and take you on a journey, but they're not so much prog stuff, for example, is just where people are messing about and doing things to show off. But there was none of that. It was like, this is a composition and it's going to go from here to here and it will take you from there to there. But a lot of it, you don't even realise how you got there by the time of the journey. So, like I say, tarred and feathers. And it's just like, how the hell, or Rez, or just how did you get from there to there? How did you clever man?
It's and again, I think that this is down to the fact that Tim was only being Tim. Yeah. It wasn't like there was no pretense about that. This was the music he felt inside of him, and you see it in a lot of musicians. And I don't know whether or not you've seen this over the years, that you can hear that these guys have got talent, but compromises have been made in order to reach people. And I've never ever thought that was right, that was true with Tim's music. It was just like, this is who I am. And I think really at the end of the day, therein lies the difference, because I genuinely think that talent will always find its level. And he just had zero time for compromising the vision that he had.
And he had to set up he was so ahead of his time in that he had his own video production set up. He had his own label. They had everything indoors. And ironically, with YouTube and with the way things are now, he would have been in his element, because all those tools that he was, cutting together, film and editing like that, and recording at home, but with all the digital tools and the tools of distribution he would have had now, he was so far ahead of the game. He was making content and making little weird films 40 years ago. He was ahead, so far ahead. With the visual side of visually, awfully, people say, across different, the vision artistically, with the way the band looked, with the sound, with the every piece of packaging was all. You don't get much of that, to be honest. You don't get the visionaries in rock music.
I think I was going to say, I think you're absolutely spot on the money with that. That's a rare commodity to have these days, where you have something which is entirely in house. And I think Cardiacs today would have thrived on that, and I think that they'd be a much bigger band today than they'd ever had. I remember hearing or reading an article about Tim Smith saying that he really wanted to play this music as old people because it would look so stupid.
But another thing, when you saw them live, they always looked so cool as well. And they also,
I know, they
looked cool because they weren't trying to be cool. They looked like especially on that last tour they did, the footage on that, they looked really, with the singers and the percussion and the
there's a great moment at the end of the Mare's Nest video the live video which they shot with. I think they shared the afternoon with Napalm Death. It was a church
they both managed by the same company, weren't they? Or something.
Yeah, that's right. And right at the very end of that video, they just play this one chord, and they play it for 2 to 3 minutes, and the whole band are just going, and they just build this chord. And I'm not kidding you, no band has ever looked cooler playing one chord for 3 minutes, and they just all of them standing there. Nothing else is happening. They're just playing this chord. There's like smoke and stuff billowing in the background and stuff, and they're just. I personally think it's a quintessential Cardiacs moment. Actually,
it's bizarre because I mean, you know, they're said to have been. You know, they opened for Blur, didn't they?
Did they?
Yeah, they opened for Blur at the Mile End gig. Because Graham Coxon and Damon Albarn are big fans, and but it was really weird when Tim passed. There were so many people, you know, the Blur guys were Mike Patton and Elton John, and
I know
all these people sort of coming out saying how much they love Cardiacs, and it's just like this is really weird, and you know, just very strange. I mean, it was just one of those things where, and there was that tribute album, wasn't there? That Carlos was involved putting together.
You get Stephen Wilson's on that tribute. Was it Stone Age Dinosaurs that he did?
I can't remember. It's Knife Welder on there. Who was that band? Oh, I don't know what they're called.
Did Ocean Size do anything on that?
It might be Ocean. It's all those sort of guys, yeah. What are they? North Sea Radio Orchestra. Magic Numbers is what I was trying to think of.
All right, yeah, okay.
And Andy Partridge is on it as well, isn't he? He does Andy Partridge on one of them, I think. Oh,
I mean, really, when you think about it, if there's one good thing to take away from this is that it was a legacy that any artist can be proud of, and it was documented. You know, it's not like we missed it. It's not like there was a moment and we all missed it. It was, as you say, because he was a what would you call almost like a polymath, really, sort of like, you know, had his hands in so many different pies. He was able to document so much of what went on. And the thing I really liked about hearing people talk about him is that he didn't sound like he was a dickhead.
No, I've never, I've spoken to. He's lovely, he's a very talented man. And it's just, we're lucky to have his legacy of his work, and, you know, just blimey. But yeah, it's very strange. Must be. I mean, I think it's going to be one of those things where more and more people will discover them. I think they'll become this legendary band, a bit like Love became, you know, like when we were kids, Love or the Zombie or something like that. I think they'll be considered with future generations, like up there with Love, Zombie, you know, the great psychedelic 60s rock bands that were lost at the time, but obviously revered in the 90s and 2000s.
The Nick Drakes of this world.
Exactly, the Nick Drake syndrome, where there's somebody who was obviously brilliant, overlooked. And I think there will be a continuation at the Cardiacs, and I'm just very glad we've, we haven't really talked about practice chaps or anything. I mean, there's just so much stuff here that, what a magnificent career and what a magnificent legacy's left. So, and there's the LSD album still left without vocals, isn't there?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Is for that. I wouldn't, I wouldn't pretend to know anything. So, there's still more stuff in the can, as it were. But I mean, what a career.
Yeah, as I said, we might see some more stuff in the future, but if we never do, it's enough.
What a legacy! Brilliant.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. We'll wrap that up. But thanks for. I don't feel like I'm a particular authority on Cardiac because I wasn't there, And I
Oh
discovered.
well, as I said, I don't particularly think I'm an authority either. I was just some lucky arsehole that happened to witness some of this. That's really what it comes down
I
to.
wish I'd seen some more. But thank you so much, Simon. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Matt.